Tortas are quite possibly the most delicious sandwich on the planet. There are so many different tasty filling combinations, and here's one of my favorite ways to eat the Mexican sandwich. This is the Torta de Milanesa of your dreams. The bread used for tortas is pretty important, but if you don't live near a Mexican market or your grocery store doesn't have options, it's pretty hard to find. I'm gonna sound like the whitest guy on the planet saying this. Teleras and bolillos are sort of classic torta bread options, and they're both sort of modeled after baguette as a base. Teleras are a little bit softer and sweeter, which is actually my preference for a torta. Good news is they're really easy to make. Honestly, this is probably one of the easiest bread recipes out there. This recipe comes from Nopalito, one of my all-time favorite cookbooks. I've made some adjustments to it, mainly to make it work without a stand mixer. In a large bowl, mix together 8 grams of active dry yeast with 300 grams of warm water. To that, add 600 grams of all-purpose flour, and then mix it in with a wooden spoon or a fork until you just can't anymore and you have to switch to your hands. Mix that with your hands until it's come together and it's almost smooth. This doesn't have to be perfect here because this is gonna sit covered for an hour to rest and rise. While that rests, we can make a spicy and acidic Arbol Salsa to bring some heat to the sandwich. Real quick, I need to ask you guys this. Let me know in the comments if you've heard of or had a torta before. We lived in Texas for like 15 years and my parents had never heard of this, which was like just shocking to me. So I need to know if you guys have had this and where you live. If you're in Texas or anywhere else, just let me know. Arbols are these beautiful, spicy little chilies that are a lot hotter than people realize. They work really perfectly in small batch salsas like the one that we're making today. 3 Arbols is gonna get you a pretty hot salsa. I'd say go for 2 if you don't like spice, but you gotta think there's a lot of other things going on this sandwich, so you wanna be able to taste the heat that's in this salsa. Remove the seeds from your chilies and set them aside. Take 4 of the best tasting tomatoes you can find and go ahead and dice them. We also need a clove of garlic, so remove the paper and crush that. At the stove, we can heat up a big squeeze of oil and add in the garlic clove. Add it when the oil is cool, that way it sort of gauges the temperature as it rises. Once it's bubbling, you know it's hot enough to add in the Arbols. These are gonna fry in the oil for like 15 seconds max. The color is gonna brighten and that will actually be enough time to soften them while they cool. Remove them from the pan and then add in the tomatoes to begin cooking. These are gonna release their juices, so don't worry about adding any water. Be careful about like splashes and sort of oil spills at this point because the Arbols have made the oil a little bit spicier, so don't pepper spray yourself. Bring these to a simmer and then cook them until most of the tomato water is gone. Roughly 10 minutes or so. You should be able to run a spoon through the pan and not get it immediately filling back with water. Season this with salt while they cook, and once softened, add them to a blender with the Arbols and a splash of white vinegar. This is probably gonna need more salt, but you won't know until you taste it. If it's too thin, you can go ahead and throw it back into the pan over medium heat to reduce until it's like thick and slightly runny. A little of this is gonna go a long way, but as I mentioned, we've gotta think about a lot of other things going into the sandwich. I think what's so special about the sandwich is the layers of texture, fat, and acidity all working in harmony. This is really spicy as a dip for a chip on its own. Trust me, I ate like half a batch of it in one sitting, but it's gonna work perfectly in harmony with everything else that's going on. Our dough should be doubled in size at this point, which is gonna make it much easier to mix our sugar and fat into. In a small bowl, mix together 40 grams of sugar with 12 grams of kosher salt and 45 grams of a neutral oil, peanut, canola, vegetable, something like that. It sounds like a lot of sugar, but it's gonna help with the flavor and texture of this dough a ton. Once it's pasty, add it into your dough ball and begin the process of kneading it into a smooth, supple dough. I'm not gonna lie to you, this starts out kinda gross. It's initially greasy and you can feel all the grains of sugar and salt, but as you work it, the fat and sugar begin to work themselves throughout the dough, and the water that's in the dough begins to melt the salt and sugar. It's gonna feel like it's not gonna come together, but after about 5 minutes, you're gonna start to notice the change. Once you hit the 10-minute mark, this should be springy and beautiful and supple, and we can begin breaking this down into the rolls themselves. Start by cutting the dough in half, and make sure the halves are close to about the same weight. A scale is really helpful here. From there, each half will be taken down into 3 balls, roughly 150 to 170 grams each. Take each piece and roll it on the board to create a tight ball. It's best to keep one end holding tight to the board and roll your hand like a cage on top of it. Your palm is going to be barely touching the dough, and your fingers and sort of the heel of your hand are going to be on the board. Once balled, press them into elongated discs, almost egg-shaped, and then using a chopstick, press 2 perpendicular lines into the top of the bread. These are the classic like Teleras style for the rolls. To get these to stay, you do need to press pretty hard though. Place these on a parchment lined tray and cover it to rise for another hour. As they rise, we have time to clean up and prep our chicken for these sandwiches. If you know me, you can guess by now that I love the fact that a classic torta has a chicken cutlet inside of it. Milanesa comes from Milanese, the classic Italian dish that is like veal or chicken Milanese, and it's a cutlet cutlet that's fried and crispy like the one that we're seeing. Italian immigrants brought this from Italy to South and Central America, and I absolutely love seeing traditional recipes transcend regionality. I don't know, I love the intersection of travel and tradition and food and authenticity, and really like throwing that all out the window for the people that are in that place. I don't know, there's something cool about that. Take 2 trimmed chicken breasts and butterfly them into 4 even thin pieces. Each breast is gonna give you 2 pieces. Take those pieces and pound them so they're equally thin. And then we're gonna season both sides with a liberal amount of kosher salt and pepper, along with a little bit of MSG if you're bad. I covered the same technique in my Italian cutlet video if you wanna check that out. It's based on my family's recipe and helps explain a lot why I season now versus seasoning the breading. Let this rest covered in the fridge for the time being. This is gonna allow the salt to evenly season the entire piece of chicken. After the hour rise, our rolls should be nice and airy and doubled in size. Place these into a 375 Fahrenheit oven for 14 to 16 minutes. At about the halfway point, it's nice to rotate the tray if your oven is like mine. It's pretty uneven. The back right corner is much warmer than the back left corner. Don't know why. You're gonna notice just how fluffy and springy these get as they go into the oven. Now that I know how to make these, I make them pretty regularly and I have eaten so many of them. They're perfect for sandwiches of any kind, breakfast sandwiches, burgers, tortas. Like, they just work so well. You can keep them in the fridge, you can keep them in the freezer, and they stick around for a while. And then you've got these like beautiful, luscious, soft white bread buns for use on whatever you'd like. These do need some time to rest and cool before they're good to go, so set them on a wire rack until they've cooled completely. During this rest, we can prep our torta toppings. Thinly sliced white onion goes a long way to bring a little crisp, sharp bite. I like these pretty much shaved though. You can place these in some cold water to make them a little bit less harsh if you'd like that. This sandwich will also need a mountain of crisp, cool lettuce, so finally shred some iceberg and place it in the fridge to stay cold. I love getting a torta that has a ton of shredded, unmelted Oaxacan cheese on it, so I'll pull some apart for mine. Oaxacan cheese is almost like a chewier mozzarella, so a string cheese can be a good replacement if you can't find it. We've already got a salsa for a spicy component, but creamy, limey mayo is also really delicious as a cool, fatty counterpoint. You could totally use the classic mayonnaise, but it can easily be replicated with some Kewpie mayo mixed with a touch of fresh lime juice. The ratio is to taste, it's up to you. Just make sure that the sauce isn't watery in the end. You still need to be able to spread this on our toasted bun. For the last creamy component, beans can serve as a spread to bring both flavor and texture. For a really easy refried bean, heat a skillet over medium and add a little bit of oil or pork fat to the pan. Once hot, add in a can of drained pinto beans. You're gonna season this with salt, a ton of fresh black pepper, lots of cumin, coriander, smoked paprika, and something spicy. This could be cayenne, this could be some of the salsa we made, or just powdered chilies. Add a little water and begin mashing the beans with a spoon or potato masher if you've got it. Continue working through it until most of the beans have been crushed and you're left with a semi-chunky, semi-smooth bean paste. You want this to be spreadable as a topping, so adjust the texture with water as needed. Keep this warm on the stove until we need it later. So to recap, we've got creaminess from the beans, mayo, and later we're gonna add an avocado, crunchiness from the lettuce, onion, and cutlets, and then spice from the salsa to cut all of it. Woo, we're gonna be eating good, I promise you that. To finish this whole thing off, we just need to bread and fry these cutlets. The standard breading procedure is first flour, then egg wash, and then breadcrumbs. Mix 2 eggs with a little water and a pinch of salt to create the egg wash. For the breadcrumbs, I've had a lot of success using all panko or a mix of standard breadcrumbs and panko. I'm gonna be using the latter today. To combat any of you seasoning warriors in the comments, I will add some garlic powder and smoked paprika to the breadcrumbs just to make you happy. For flour, I'll just pour it over the chicken until it's covered lightly. That way I don't have to dirty another container. Tap off any excess flour and add the chicken into the egg wash. Make sure it's totally coated and then drop it into the breadcrumbs. Press those into each piece to make sure that the breading doesn't fall off into the pan. We are gonna be aiming for a crunchy golden brown color, very similar to this little chicken strip here. Heat enough oil to coat the bottom of a skillet over medium-high until it's nice and hot. I like a mix of peanut and olive oil for this. You can test the heat by dropping a little breadcrumb in. If it bubbles nicely, it's ready to go. If it does nothing, it's not. Gently lay your chicken pieces into the oil and listen to the singing of beautiful cutlets being created. They should sizzle and bubble without popping aggressively. 2 minutes aside is a really good time for these, but you can pretty much go off color alone. If they're golden and crispy, they're ready to flip. If they are pale, they're not. Hit these with salt as soon as they come out of the pan. That way the salt adheres to the hot oil that's on the cutlets. With the chicken finished, all we need is a toasted roll to use as the base. A little butter toasting goes a long way to create a crispy barrier for our creamy toppings. To build it, start with a bottom bun that will be topped with our warm refried bean. Place your crispy cutlet on top of the beans, and I like to spoon the salsa on here. Place some of your pulled Oaxacan cheese on the salsa. A little tip is if you split building this into 2 halves versus piling it all on one side, you have a better shot of not losing all your fillings to the plate. For the top bun, smear on that limey mayo. Here's your lettuce, those thin onions, and I forgot the avocado till now, so I'll place that on as well. Use a knife to help guide the top into place and feast your eyes on one massive torta. Everything here is thought out and balanced, and in my opinion, every part is necessary. I left tomato out as a topping because it's not the season yet. Most grocery store tomatoes kind of taste gross right now. The cross section on this sandwich is truly a thing of beauty. I think this is straight up one of the best things I've ever made, and also one of the best things I've ever eaten. There's really nothing else to say other than this is about as close to perfection as I think I can get. Thank you so much for watching, and massive shout out to the amazing people supporting me directly on Patreon through patreon.com/CameronMarty. They get some cool benefits for supporting the channel, and I get to keep making videos like this. Check it out and consider becoming a patron. If you're in need of a recipe to take to cookouts this summer, check out this creamy baked hatch chili mac and cheese. It's about as good as it sounds. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.